Hi everyone, I'm Ken Johnson. This is an nVisium sponsored webinar. We're going to talk about securing AWS. This actually isn't the recording of the original webinar. The material is the same. Truth be told, I actually forgot to hit the record button, so I'm now re-recording this presentation. So it'll be the same material either way. So about nVisium real quick, we're roughly a 30-person application security company, so that's really all we do. And we're based out of Herndon, Virginia, not far from Washington, D.C. We've been around a while. We were founded in 2009 by Jack Menino. And in 2013, Seth Law, our CSO, and I partnered with Jack to grow not only the company, but also our offerings. We wanted to offer services that were of more help than what we had seen out there. So going into that a little bit, we do a lot of training, instructor-led training, and we have an e-learning platform that both Seth and I built together. It's really new. If you're tired of the, clicking next, and answering some multiple choice questions and being bored out of your mind with the traditional security CBTs, I really suggest you reach out to us and we'll get you set up with a demo. I think you'll really like it. We do web and mobile application assessments. You might hear them called penetration tests or audits or whatever the case. We do a lot of those. Code remediation, we will actually fix your code for you. We'll work with your development team to fix your code. And application security automation, that's basically us going into an environment and automating security into your development pipeline. And this is really to address the fact that a lot of organizations have code that's constantly changing, and you can't necessarily do a full review on an application and take 2 weeks and think that when you come back, the code will, be the same as what you reviewed. And you're really just trying to catch things as they're cropping up and as code is changing quite frequently. Anyway, so that's about nVisium. For me, I am the CTO at nVisium, and I'm a partner. I am a Navy veteran. Things I like to work on or speak about are, so I like to talk about DevOps security. I love to talk about exploiting web applications. I code, but I also like talking about securing your code. And I'm really into Node, Elixir, Python, Ruby, and Go. And obviously AWS, so that's why we're talking about all this. I run engineering here at nVisium. I'm sort of a hybrid developer and security engineer. Really what I want you to take away from these slides is that I've been on the defensive side for a while. A lot of what comes out of this presentation is just my practical approach to how I secure our AWS, at least the basics anyways, things that I kind of found helpful. So going back to it, I work for a security company, right? So I have some concerns. I'm the CTO here. I'm responsible for AWS. We are a security company. So, clearly I have some serious concerns. One of them being risk assessments. If you ever had a client or a partner or a vendor who needs to ask you, hey, do you pass all of these minimum sets of checks? Do you do these things? We want to make sure that we can answer that we are doing our due diligence, specifically as it pertains to AWS here. Data security, clearly we don't want data to be exfiltrated from AWS. And also reputation. If you're a security company, it's a pretty bad thing if, you're supposed to set the standard. So it's a pretty bad thing if you end up getting hacked. So I have a lot of concerns. And, giving you a background, AWS for us used to just be this thing. We had like a site or two on there, or maybe our primary website, nVisium.com, and maybe a couple other things, but, it really wasn't that important. And then it became a little bit more important. We started adding some services to it, and then it became business critical. And at that point, I got really worried, right? Because a lot of business critical stuff is now operating within an AWS environment that I need to be able to control. So my problem statement here is, how do I prevent attacks? How do I know if it's happening? And also, how can I recover if the worst case scenario somehow happens? So the answer to this and some of the things I'm going to cover are hardening and making it difficult to reach our AWS environment. And I specifically mean that in an IAM capacity or a user management capacity. So meaning I really just don't want people to be able to log into our environment. I don't want them to be able to steal access keys and interact with the API. That's what we're really talking about here. I'm not, there's a lot of things you can secure within AWS, but that's my primary concern in this presentation. Monitoring. If the AWS environment is breached and there's some weird activity going on, I want to be alerted to it immediately. I don't want to find out after the fact. I don't want to have to go through logs and not really have a plan and get to it and say, well, what should I look at? I don't really, and again, that would be after the fact. So I don't really want to do that. I want to monitor in real time. And of course, I need to be able to restore. So let's say that worst case scenarios happen somehow. They were able to get in. I don't know how they would, but they got in. Need to be able to restore from that attack. So AWS hardening basics. Really, we're just making it difficult for attackers to get into our AWS environment. Step 1, don't use the root account. Use it only when absolutely necessary. Disable the access keys for that root account or just delete them all outright. Enable multi-factor authentication and do this not only through the web but also the API, and strong password policy. So let's talk a little bit about why you don't want to use the root account. The root account is a very important account. Every environment has it, and it's essentially God mode permissions, for that AWS environment. What I recommend here is that when circumstances arise that require to use the root account, that you actually notify your other team members that you're about to use it, and there's a specific reason, and we'll talk about that when we get into CloudWatch metrics. Again, just to disable or delete root account access keys. Also have a verbal and written policy stating that you do not create access keys for the root account. That should be a rule within your organization. And also, while I'm talking about written policies, one thing I kind of learned from experience is that you want to go ahead and document everything you do from a security perspective, every positive thing you do to further harden, monitor, whatever it is inside of your AWS environment. Document it as you do it. This will save you a lot of headaches down the road when someone comes knocking and says, I need you to document XYZ, which is likely to inevitably happen. You don't want to have to go back and try to remember all this and spend a bunch of time doing that. So that's just from my personal experience. Multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is a fancy AWS term for two-factor authentication. Just like anything else you use, if credentials are stolen or if they're guessed, you want to have a secondary form of authentication in place so that, all right, well, hey, you got my password, but look, you can't get any further because you have to enter this token that's only available on, we'll say, my cell phone or something along those lines. And you can do this in one of two ways. You can use the virtual device, which would be using something like Duo Security or Google Authenticator to take a snapshot of the QR code, and I'll show you doing that. Or you can do some, there's some hardware solutions out there like Gemalto. I have in here a link with a full list of all supported MFA devices. This is ridiculously easy to do. There's really no reason that you shouldn't do it. Granted, there's going to be some overhead in order to allow users to be able to enable multi-factor authentication on their accounts, right? But well worth it, not hard to do, maybe a little tedious, but not such a big deal. So let's demonstrate enabling MFA on with a device on an IAM account. So first you want to navigate to the identity and access management piece of AWS. Go down to security credentials. Once you're down in security credentials, you go to Manage MFA Device, click that, and choose in this case, we're going to choose the virtual MFA device. Take a picture with, we'll say Google Authenticator, take a picture of that QR code, enter in the first authentication code that pops up, and let that rotate, enter then the second one, hit enter, and you're good to go. You've got MFA enabled on your account. So at this point, I should mention once again that if you do not have administrator privileges or IAM level privileges, you're not going to be able to enable MFA on your own account. We do have a solution, right? The solution is this policy, which is really not helpful. I doubt you can grok that. So I gave you the link here. This link can be used, and these slides will be available, so you'll be able to copy and paste these links and go and read about how to do that. But the basic gist is take that policy at this link, modify it for each user, apply that user's policy, which allows them to interact and modify their own MFA device, apply it to that user's account, and they'll be able to do what they need to do without elevating their privileges or something along those lines. If you need a shared, during the original webinar, this question had come up before I even got to this slide. So I'm glad to see that this was relevant. Basically, if you have a root account, there might be multiple people that need access to that root account, but that is one of the most critical accounts for enabling MFA on, right? There is a solution so that, meaning one administrator, or one person with, access to the root credentials can't obviously have it on their cell phone if two other people need to use it, right? So TOTP is a great protocol. And I really like 1Password, and 1Password for Teams can allow you to share that TOTP code. Basically, the app and other apps like 1Password, allow you to take a screenshot of that QR code, enter in the credentials. Now you can share it with relevant team members, and they can always see that TOTP code inside the app. So it's really useful. So the API and MFA. We've talked about multi-factor authentication, through the web console, but truthfully, when you go out and I did a little bit of homework, I did a little bit of research, and I realized, hey, one of the ways that most people seem to get really owned is that they'll put their secret token and access key and access secret token in source code, and that'll get exposed or downloaded off a developer's box or whatever the case is, but somehow an attacker gets those keys. It seems to be very common. It's not this obscure thing. I actually have a link later in this presentation that actually you go through it and you see a bunch of people basically saying me too, me too, me too, this happened to me. So it's very prevalent, and it seems to be that those particular set of credentials get exposed, and then you've got a problem because typically they've got some privileged access to the AWS API. So we want to prevent somebody with those credentials from accessing the API. At a minimum, you want to go ahead and apply this policy to administrators and power user groups, and really any group that can do anything that is damaging, deleting EC2 instances, for example, or retrieving sensitive S3 bucket data, we'll say. So anything that might be an issue. You apply this policy to the particular user group that you're concerned about. This line specifically is what tells AWS that in order to interact with the API or the web, both web and API, that you must use multi-factor authentication. And if you don't use multi-factor authentication, obviously, hey, you're not going to be able to do anything. So that's a good thing. Truth be told, though, when I did this, it was super painful. It really was, because while I'm going to discuss STS, or Security Token Service, while most of the AWS services seem to support STS, there's one in particular that caused me a little bit of heartburn, but I've got a solution for it. But even using STS was a bit difficult, right? So just be aware that when you do this, you need to prepare ahead of time, because There may be some things that worked before that now don't. So leverage STS in order to, this code specifically gives you the way I am able to retrieve using Ruby my STS access key, secret key, and session token. And I'll show you a screenshot of that. First, here's the code. Basically, you see I've got a region here. I've set an access key ID. You'd want to replace that, a secret access key, and then a serial number, which you can retrieve from the IAM. When we showed the screenshot of IAM, then security credentials, then managing the MFA device, that's where you would get this MFA device. Well, I noticed I misspelled this. That's where you would get the MFA device information, the serial number. So the token code, that's what you're going to get from Google Authenticator or Duo Security or whatever you're using, and then the duration is, how long are these temporary credentials good for? And I say that because when you see this output of the script, you actually now get a new access key ID, a new secret access key, and a session token. So it's not just the session token that is this, thing that you use to get access to the API. You actually need all three of these. And that's important because somebody during the webinar had asked, hey, is the session token, I think it was FIPS 140.2 compliant or something along those lines. And basically what I responded with, I don't know the answer. I can say that the session token is very unique. It changes, it's very unique per change. It's very long. And also, even if you got that right, you have to get the new access key ID and the new secret access key right too. So, it's not the easiest to go ahead and brute force, I guess, is what I'm saying. So let's say you did that, right? You've got the new access key ID and secret token and session token. Here's an example of using it. So here's EC2 API tools. You can see we're just doing the EC2 describe instances. We pass in the -O option, -W option like we would normally. Of course, now we're providing those temporary credentials. And then we pass in the -T or session token. So there's a third thing now that we have to pass in. So it's, it's a pretty good layered approach. If you don't like Ruby, for our Python fans out there, and I think it's a mixture of Python and Bash, this repository has just a different way of doing it in those languages. So, Elastic Beanstalk. So this is my heartache. This was my pain point. Elastic Beanstalk did not work with STS. There's no support for it whatsoever. That's a pretty significant issue, right? Because you can't do like a get AWS push or something along those lines where you would be able to use the built-in Elastic Beanstalk tools to push up your new code. Now it just doesn't work because STS isn't supported. So there is a workaround. If you use GitHub or AWS Code Commit or Amazon S3, and it doesn't matter if you're using GitHub private repos, it's all totally fine. It's a very simple setup process. It's one of the easiest things I've ever done inside of AWS. You can use Code Pipeline. Code Pipeline is very useful for this, and the basic gist is that it's checking for changes to the code in whatever repository and branch that you are concerned about. So let's say for us, master is considered pristine and production ready. So if I pointed at a repository and say review the master branch, if a change occurs, it pulls in that code, pushes it into EB. You can even implement a Jenkins Hudson box in there as well if you wanted to run some tests and then a build. So it's really nice, very easy to use. And then one final note, I kind of had a panic attack when I first enabled this because I immediately couldn't use the web interface. So I just had to log out and log back in. So if you discover that oddity, don't be too concerned. Password policies are important. It's just another kind of layered approach, right? We do have MFA, but we do want to make passwords that are hard to guess. I really won't spend a ton of time on this because it's like a super widely debated topic when it comes to password policies. So I'm just going to say that, look, in here, this example, we've got all the, the one uppercase letter, lowercase letter, number, alphanumeric character, all that. A minimum length, this shows 8. Password expirations within something, that shows 90 days. I mean, I do it for less, but if you want to do it for 90 days, it's your prerogative. And then you can prevent password reuse. So in this case, the last 3 passwords we used, we can't reuse them, right? So that's about all I'll pretty much say about password policies, but you should have one. Hardening recap. Make credentials hard to guess. If guests are stolen, still have MFA. Biggest thing here, most important thing, root account is king. Protect your king. Do not use your root account routinely. Do not have those access tokens available. There's really no reason for it. And make sure that MFA is enabled on it. Things I didn't talk about, which you probably heard or read in every AWS checklist you've ever seen, which is stuff about S3 bucket policies and SSH key management and all that fun stuff. Look, the basic gist for that is there are tons of those types of checklists out there. I don't need to rehash that. You should know that that's something you should be concerned about. And frankly, the trusted advisor service that AWS offers will find a lot of this. Honestly, I think all of these issues. So it's just not really, for me, yeah, you should be concerned about it, but it's not something I want to spend a bunch of time on. But if you want to, go out there and find out more, here's some links. And it's about all I'll cover on that. So moving on to monitoring, right? We want to detect malicious activity. We want to detect anomalies. So assuming our prevention techniques, our hardening didn't work, I really wanted to know, right? I wanted to know so if somebody's spinning up instances, if somebody's changing my security groups, if something along those lines that's kind of weird and unexpected, especially for our small development team, it will be very obvious to me that somebody is doing something they shouldn't be doing. I wanted to have a mechanism for alerting me to those changes. And that's what this section is all about. I'm going to give you some examples, but ultimately you really do have to figure out what's right for you. What works for me and what works for you may not be the same thing. It might be that it's too noisy, not enough information. You really want to customize the amount of, CloudWatch metrics you have or something along those lines. So just keep that in mind. This is what worked for me. This is my story. It's not, something that'll work for everybody. I understand that. So 4 important services: CloudTrail, SNS, Config, and CloudWatch. These are together some of the most powerful monitoring tools, AWS off. Well, really, as far as I know, the only major monitoring services they offer. CloudTrail is for logging. SNS is for notifications. SNS stands for Simple Notification Service. Config is like the difference between Config and CloudWatch, and this question had come up, and I think it's important to sort of reiterate. Think of Config as one huge data dump. So if anything changes, or if the things you've marked to monitor change, you're going to just know that happened, and you're going to get a huge data dump. When it comes to CloudWatch, this is more of a very refined, particular set of things that you're looking for, that you've defined, that you've put some energy into, thinking ahead about and configuring. So it's like kind of like a hammer and a fine instrument. The difference between the two. Here's a visual of the setup. You can see Config and CloudWatch pull from CloudTrail and push to SNS. So Config and CloudWatch pull from the logging service CloudTrail and use SNS to alert you to things you might want to be alerted on. So let's talk about CloudTrail real quick. CloudTrail is, again, used for logs, log collection. To turn it on, it's very easy. You navigate to CloudTrail, you turn it on, you give it a CloudTrail name, you give it an S3 bucket that you'd like to store this data in, everything that it's collecting. You configure the log group, and I say that because you can have multiple logging groups. You can have a group that's just for the security people and a group that's just for the DevOps folks. You can separate this out, and there's always a reason to monitor things, and it may not just be a security purpose. So that is an option that's available to you. I put here just CloudTrail's security log group, and you can allow it's going to say, hey, do you want to allow us to create the CloudTrail role? Sure, go ahead. Let AWS do its thing. And at this point, it's turned on. It's logging everything to that bucket, and you can later use CloudWatch and Config to, along with this logging, to get alerts on things that you need. So, simple notification service. I love it. It's fantastic, and it's really great because as a developer, if you've ever had to build a messaging service, the pain that comes with that, and SNS just does that for you very seamlessly. Few examples of some of the ways that I get notified. They have a JSON post that they can send to your application's API over. To be specific, you can do this over SSL for secure communication. One little note here on that, which I really don't like, and I really wish Amazon would address this, is that JSON. They give you so that JSON request, it's got a content header of like text plain, and so Rails and Node and other frameworks that are properly following the protocol get messed up, and they don't interpret this as a JSON request. So you have to do a little bit of workaround on that. And I just really wish AWS would address that. That's one thing I don't love about it. But anyways, bottom line is you can get a text message, or you can get sent via email. There's actually more ways than what I'm showing you here to get notified. You can, if it's something you need to alert on immediately, you can send a text message. You can send an email. You can do Slack notifications. You actually tie into Lambda. And do something along those lines. If you have multiple subscribers, I really suggest using that sort of functionality, and I'll explain subscribers and topics and all of that. But yeah, you want to see anything immediately, SNS is great for that. So create a topic, give it a proper naming convention. In this case, root account usage is what we're using. Because we're going to track root accounts that get used, or track the root account when it gets used. We're going to create a subscription, and when we create a subscription, that means we can have, again, multiple subscribers, so meaning you can do this for multiple people in multiple ways. You can text 3 different people, email 4 others, however you want to do it here. It's very easy, just follow along. When you click create subscription, you just, from that protocol, you can see here it's M as in Mike, S, so a text message, and you put in the endpoint, which is really just a phone number. Here's an example, choosing the email protocol, you put in an email address. AWS Config. Config alerts owners to changes or non-compliance with, so in the sense that if something changes and it doesn't fall within the compliance level that your tolerance level, or if it just changes at all, you get notified about that, which is great. You can design your own custom config rules. You can choose exactly what you want to monitor, or you can use, or you can use the prepackaged AWS config rules. Some of these are, so I got some Twitter going on here. I'm going to close that out. Sorry about that. So I've got the list of the AWS rules. We've got CloudTrail enabled. That just basically means, hey, if it's not enabled, then that's a problem. We want to make sure it's enabled at all times. We want to make sure you're using encrypted volumes at all times. We want to make sure that SSH to the world is disabled. So those are kind of the things that these cover, and you've got a link here, right here for seeing exactly what these rules do. And then you also just set alerts for changes in the firewall or changes in the VPC. Specifically here, we've got a security group, network ACL, and a VPC. If those things change, I want to know about it. So this is how you would configure it. You go to the config service, you put in the resource types you want to monitor, you choose the Amazon S3 bucket, you'll choose the SNS. You can't see it on this slide, but you'll also choose the SNS topic that you want to push alerts to. And you should be able to see it on the next slide, specifically the SNS part of that. But anyways, this slide's here because, going back a slide, you can see that we can choose what we want, or in this slide, you can just choose anything. And I actually use this option because I don't mind the noise. I don't have a huge team. And it's really negligible. It's not a big deal if I get, it's actually great that I get, a lot of, it might seem like a lot of noise, whatever, I'm fine. I go through it and just make sure everything's copacetic when I get these alerts. So I like to track everything. Again, my own personal choice. So in this slide, you can see that further down that same page, you can actually create or choose an existing SNS topic. And basically what that means is when an alert happens, it's going to send when a change happens, it's going to send the alert to that SNS topic. And if, it's got, we'll say, text message and email and whatever else on that topic, that blast is going to go out. Allow the role to be created, and then you're all set. Now you're properly monitoring with config. It's very simple. AWS CloudWatch. So you can be very particular here about what you want to see. It's very fine-grained rules. You can customize this, and I'll give you a link that has more information on how to customize these rules. But at a minimum, how you choose to monitor things is up to you, right? But I would say that these three things are at a minimum things that you should configure. So I'm going to walk through them with CloudWatch. So we're going to talk about billing alerts. If we exceed our billing, tracking root account usage. So if somebody logs in with the root account, we want to be alerted. And then obviously failed login attempts is always something that's good to notify yourself about. CloudWatch and billing, again, the reason for this is if somebody, it may not just be a security issue. It may just be somebody not, a script that ran out of control or someone not realizing what they're doing. If your cost begins to exceed what your normal baseline is, so let's say you spend, $10 a month, whatever it is, then you obviously don't want it to be $1,000 a month. That would be odd. Or if you spend, $10,000, $20,000 would be odd. So you analyze your approximate monthly spend. You analyze and approximate your monthly spend, and then that's the baseline that you go with. So in order to get started with billing alerts, you want to go into billing and you want to click, receive billing alerts, save that preference, then go to SNS and create a billing alert topic. You can do email if that's what you'd like. You can also add something more immediate, like a text message or something. Then navigate to CloudWatch. And once you go to CloudWatch, you go to metrics, and then you go to billing metrics. And just take note that there are, RDS metrics, S3 metrics. There are other metrics that make it very easy to get some data on these particular services. But here, again, we're interested in billing metrics. Once we click on that, we will have a currency option, and we'll choose, in our case, obviously, US dollars. And then we'll go down to create alarm on the lower right-hand side of this screenshot. And once we're there, we just put in the price, right? So in our case, we'll just put in $1,600. We don't want it to exceed that within our monthly period. And we'll send a notification to the billing alert topic that we created in SNS. And once we've done that, we hit create alarm. You have all of the steps available at this link to do this. It's very easy. It's very simple. Really not that difficult to do. So what I showed you as well is all that's really required to get it going. Now we're going to talk about root login. So we talked about billing. Now we're going to talk about root login usage. Again, this goes back to what I said originally. I said, hey, don't use the root account routinely, and if it is used, make sure that you notify your team. The reason is that you're going to set this up so that your team gets alerted as soon as that root account is used. And what I can say is, in my experience, that's become So in the rare instance that I forget to tell, or somebody else forgets to tell one of us that the root account's being used, people immediately jump on it. They become very proactive and, hey, this root account's being used. Who's doing what? We should be nervous. And I love that. I love that has become something we do. So to do this, you go into CloudWatch, you create the metric, to do this, you go down to logs and you choose the log. I showed you earlier using CloudTrail security log group. So I'm going to choose that log group from these logs. And once I do that, I can define the logs metric filter. And you'll see that I have a filter pattern in there. Don't worry about catching that. The link will give you what that pattern is. The link at a few slides down. And so we'll go ahead and assign that metric. And once we do that, we've just got to give some of the information that you would expect, right? It's filter name, give it a filter name that makes sense. This one's root account usage. We got our filter pattern, metric details. You have your metric namespace, metric name, metric value, all very simple. Once you do that, will have a create alarm button available to you, or a link rather, that you click on. And once you've done that, you go in here and you say, look, for this alarm, when the root account usage count is greater than or equal to 1, and this has occurred within one consecutive period, and you can see at the bottom lower right hand part here it says 5 minutes. So within 5 minutes, a 5-minute period, if the root account usage is logged in at least even just once, you're setting yourself up to receive an alarm, and for that alarm to trigger an alert. Exact steps with the picks again exist at this link, but I've also just again showed you how to do it. Failed logins. This is, let's say somebody has gotten those credentials, or rather they have the username and are trying to guess the password, trying to break into your account. You obviously want to know if that's happening. So this is where you would apply this. You go into logs. In this case, we chose the IAM log group, and we clicked create metric filter, and we put in that filter pattern, and we assigned the metric. Again, filled in the information as you would want to fill it in, and clicked create alarm. Once that was done, went in, and really all that you need to know is that beyond the name and the description, which is just, hey, console sign-in failures, if the login has failed with, around 3 times, so if 3 times in a row or greater the login has failed, now and that's within a 5-minute period, and you can change that obviously. Now you're going to get alerted on that. So that's it's really nice. And again, all the steps are here at this link. Excuse me. So let's say you want to create your own custom filter patterns. I gave you 3 different examples, but if you want to customize even further, which I absolutely recommend, this link will help you get started with that. I want to talk about AWS and Splunk. So Splunk, I'm new to it. I actually haven't been using Splunk for very long, but and I want to be clear about, when it comes to Splunk, or it comes to AWS, or it comes to any of the technology that I'm talking about, I don't have, our company, myself, I don't have any affiliation with any of these organizations, right? So I just want to be very clear about that. This is just something, again, that's like what I use, and I figured I'd just share it with those who, in this instance, might actually be using Splunk. So there's 2 separate plugins, or apps as they're called within Splunk, that you'll need. There's the Splunk app for AWS and the Splunk add-on. I got the links right here. What I love about it is there are a lot of things you can view, and these are just a few examples. I'll pick out, so SSH key pair activity, that's awesome. SSH keys get added, deleted, whatever. User activity and VPC activity, I think those are very nice things to receive updates on. And here's a screenshot of using the AWS app for Splunk. This isn't our data, this is just a screenshot that they provide in their documentation. And here's a topology screen, so if you want to get a topology, it builds a topology of your AWS environment. And then you've got this is a screenshot of billing. So these are some pretty screenshots for you. So to add the plugins, it's like anything else in Splunk. When you add a new app, you just go to apps, install app from file. Those links I gave you have the apps that you can download, and you just upload them up to your Splunk instance. Splunk will need an AWS account in order to retrieve data, so you'll go ahead and go into AWS and create a Splunk user, and it will need a specific Splunk policy in order to access the information that it needs to retrieve from AWS. So this link right here has the exact policy you'll want to apply to that Splunk user. So once you've got the new account, the new Splunk AWS account, go into the Splunk add-on for AWS and go into configuration and put in, it says create new account there. Just then put in the credentials that you need for that are associated with that Splunk user. Do the same for the AWS app for Splunk. You would go to configure, add AWS account, and then each one of these inputs will need to be configured. Now I'll tell you, this isn't where everything ends. This is just sort of how you basically get set up. This is just how you start pulling information. How you do alerting in Splunk is up to you. You can further define a lot of things within these apps. So, I'm not going to go into all that. Just be aware that these exist and they're pretty useful. Again, so monitoring recap. Just recap real quick this section. Really, we're just trying to alert ourselves when things change or something that we might be concerned about is happening. And I thought this was an interesting QORA thread, and I'd mentioned this earlier in the presentation. Basically, there was somebody who mentioned, hey, my AWS account was hacked. I have a $50,000 bill. Here's my issue. And so the highlights I got from that article, and by the way, this person ended up getting refunded by AWS. But what I thought was interesting is that AWS, according to this article anyways, has like a review board, right? And they're determining if you were just sloppy or if you did enough of your due diligence for this not to be really your fault. I mean, I guess they sort of review your case to see if you're, well, anyways, that's what the thread says. I don't know, how much truth there is behind that, but I guess they review your case to see if you're at fault. We've known this for a long time, but it's mentioned in the thread. Bots are scouring GitHub and Bitbucket and whatnot for exposed access keys. One of the more so there's sort of like a veteran poster on that about AWS on that forum, and what they mentioned, or what this person mentioned, was you should be doing the things that we've just talked about in this presentation, at least some of the things we talked about in this presentations, in order for if this is to happen, let's say you get hacked and your bill goes out of control, you should have done these minimum things to make sure that if that review board is reviewing your issue, your fraud that has occurred, you're in the clear. And again, I had mentioned this earlier in the presentation. A lot of people on this, a scary amount of people on this thread said, "Oh, this happened to me. My account was abused. My credentials were, leaked or otherwise obtained by somebody who was malicious, and they did some nasty things on my AWS environment and cost me a lot of money." So just some interesting things there. So restoration and recovery. This really applies to more than just AWS. This is just from my experience over the years. And these are just very basic. Like, there are people out there who are amazing incident response people, really are rock stars in that aspect. I am not one of them, but I can tell you that these are some of the things that I've learned that are very basic, and I've learned along the way in my career. Understand who to contact within your organization when things go bad. Keep your contact lists up to date. Understand how to communicate. So if one of your developers' boxes is owned, meaning their laptop has been exploited by an outside attacker, or your whole system is potentially questionable, you're not even sure if email is secure, if you're whatever, Slack or Campfire or whatever you're using, you're not sure if that is secure, then my suggestion would be to speak only over the phone, and that's sort of the protocol that we have, right? In certain extreme instances. Anyways, understand what information to retrieve, where to get it, how to parse it, what should you be looking for. Perfect examples, if you're using, external cloud providers like, I don't know, Salesforce or Google Cloud or I don't know, Box.com or something like that. Make sure you're grabbing the relevant information that you'll need should there be even a perceived threat of an attack. You want to be able to have that information pulled in ahead of time and know where to get it. And also make sure that you've got backups and know where they're located and know that they are secure. And do not, I'm going to speak to that actually. So do not use AWS to back up your AWS. I say that, however, during the original presentation, somebody said, look, we've got a secondary AWS account. It is a write once only transaction that occurs to our, I think it was Glacier maybe or something along those lines, from the primary account to the secondary account. Access to the secondary AWS account is completely restricted to a very small subset of security people within the organization. And in that case, I mean, that's a pretty responsible way to do it, granted. So I really can't, I mean, that's a pretty responsible way to do it. What I mean specifically is do not, in your primary account or whatever account, like don't use the same account to back up AWS data, right? Because if somebody's grabbed your credentials, if somebody's got access to that AWS environment, well, those backups, they're toast. You may not even be able to log in anymore to access those backups. So, whether it's in a data center that you're, keeping these backups, or if it's in a secondary AWS account, just be very cautious about that, and know what to back up. Some common examples are S3 buckets and EBS volumes and all that stuff. But you've got people using AWS, so or engineers that are using AWS, and they should know what they need to back up. Excuse me. Here's some basic tooling that can be used for backups. I say that because I don't have a silver bullet for you. There's not some site I can point you at where you're like, well, give them their money and they'll take care of everything for you. I don't have that option available for you right now. But what I can say is, there's some open source tools. There's some solutions discussed on Stack Overflow, and there's actually another company there that you do pay them, and I think they do a few things in terms of backups. But there's really just, like I said, you kind of have to customize that yourself or figure out that solution for yourself. Don't use AWS to back up AWS. They're free. We talked about the free and paid tools. AWS API does assist you with backing up data. There are AWS tools for that. Have a plan. Always have a plan, and practice that plan. Again, I'm not an incident response expert, but I know these basic things. Someone had a question, by the way, for me to cover this, and frankly, I didn't really know what to cover. And so when I say this, so if you've got a VPC that's got a VPN server and you're doing some VPN peering between AWS into your data center, somebody asked me to just kind of talk about security with that. I frankly really didn't know what to talk about. I've done this, so I know some things, and I'll just talk about those things. General observations. Getting set up is not hard. You have zero control over the encryption used by AWS. I really hate the fact that they do SHA-1, 128 by default, and you can't change that, but that's the way it is. Routing can be a pain. So I say that because when you go to choose your VPC site or block, be sure to plan very carefully. I say that because if you want to change the IP address and CIDR block scheme for that VPC, you have to tear down the VPC. And I've not found a way to do it other than that, where you tear down the entire VPC, you tear down the VPN peering, you rebuild everything, and then you're good to go. So just be aware that you need to, from a network engineering standpoint, you do need to plan for that. Monitor that VPC heavily. Use naming conventions that make sense. They should all be, super critical VPN, whatever naming convention you want to go with, but make it very clear that that SSH key or that security group, or that gateway or whatever whatever it is, that it has a naming convention that matches up with the function of that VPC/VPN. And I say that because, again, going back to the fact that we're monitoring things, if you're trying to grok that data, you may need to say, hey, look, if if this particular naming convention comes across as having been changed, okay, we have a serious problem. We need to address that or look into it. So besides that, really wasn't sure what else to talk about. So at this point, I kind of just opened it up to the audience, and I don't really think there were any further questions here. There was a question, I think, talking about, or something along the lines of subnets talking to each other, and I just said, well, each subnet you can assign a security group to it, and then those security groups can always be configured to talk to one another, and you have fine-grained permissions when you are controlling when you're configuring a security group. You can be very specific on what ports and protocols are allowed through. So beyond that, I didn't really have anything else. So recap: make it hard for these guys to get into your environment. Be safe out there. Keep these keys out of your source code. By the way, I don't talk about it much, but that seems to be the way that people are hacked. So keep secrets out of your source code. Here's some contact info. On Twitter, I'm at cktricky. I have my email address there. For the company info, if you'd like to contact us, you're interested in a service, or you're interested in getting a demo of that e-learning platform or whatever, contact us. That's our site, and then you've got our Twitter handle. That is everything for this AWS presentation. We're doing one next month, mid-July. Tim Tomes is going to be leading it, so I hope you enjoyed this information. If you did, we'll be sending out the registration link for Tim's presentation in the next week or two, we'll say. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.